Hola a todos, aquí estamos en un nuevo conversatorio de la Red Cultural y la verdad es que hoy tenemos mucha suerte porque la Fundación para el Progreso trajo a Chile a Jason Brennan y han sido tan gentiles que nos han permitido hacerle nosotros una entrevista. Así que tenemos con nosotros a un gran economista y filósofo de la Universidad de Georgetown. Welcome, Jason, to our conversation time in Red Cultural. We try to make this space for general people to talk about topics and interesting things that related with the world today. So welcome to our conversation.
Thanks, I'm very honored that you're having me. Appreciate it.
I'm really interested about your resume because you are economics or run economics, but also you are a philosopher, which one I think is a great combination. And how these things really deal, because people forget on the real root of economics.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
That's right, yeah. I mean, economics began with Adam Smith. I mean, it didn't really begin with Adam Smith, but we tell a story about it beginning with Adam Smith, and he was the chair of moral philosophy at Glasgow. So, yeah, it was started by a moral philosopher.
Indeed.
Then became a separate field.
Yeah, actually you said it doesn't start with him because the scholastic fathers in Spain were quite amazing indeed.
Yes.
And also they were related with ethics and philosophy. And in that field you have the idea of capitalism is something really ethics, and why not, you said in your book. Yeah. So can you explain us why capitalism is the most ethics thing you can do?
So the book, Why Not Capitalism, is a response to a book by a Marxist philosopher called Why Not Socialism. And he says, deep down everybody's a socialist. I can prove it to you because I want you to imagine we're on a camping trip together and we really love and care about each other. And we have lots of other people we really love and care about. Well, if we genuinely all care about each other, what we'll do is all the things we bring we'll share as a common bounty, and we won't demand any extra payment for goods or services, and we'll try to make sure everyone's doing equally well. And then he says, doesn't that sound great? And everyone says, yes. And then he says, well, what if we start acting the way people do in a capitalist system? Like, I won't help you unless you give me a payment. I try to lord over you that I have certain riches that you don't. I won't do any work that helps people unless I get some sort of reward. It's like, wouldn't you hate that? You wouldn't want to be in a camping trip like that. And people say, you're right. So he's like, aha. So deep down, we're all really socialist. The problem with his argument is, I realized, was he was comparing what he took to be an ideal form of socialism, where I'm having you imagine that everyone is perfectly virtuous. So they're perfectly virtuous and they're also socialist. And then compare that to real life capitalism, where people are not perfectly virtuous. So he said, ideal socialism is better than ideal capitalism. What he needed to do, and what I try to do in the book, is give you a depiction of what ideal capitalism would look like. If I could wave my magic wand and turn everyone morally flawless, how might they live together? And the answer, it turns out, is on children's television. It's the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse from Disney.
Yeah.
So what happens in the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is you have Donald Duck, Daisy Duck, Mickey Mouse, and so on, all living together. Except for Pete the cat, you can write him out. Except for him, everyone is perfectly virtuous. They always do the right thing. They care about each other. They live under principles of social justice to ensure that everyone gets enough. But they do so without any form of government. And interestingly, they're also capitalist. They have stores, they buy, trade, and sell. But there's nothing that a socialist could complain about that takes place there. And so what I think this helps us do is, when people think about capitalism and socialism in the real world, they're often doing this thing where they're comparing an ideal of one system to a non-ideal of another. And what I'm trying to argue is, when you're thinking about these issues, you have to talk about, you're either doing realistic theorizing, or asking, how is the world going to work with flawed people like you and me? And then we have to take that into account. Or you have to talk about pure ideals, but you kind of can't cross between them. And when we do that, we become a lot better at thinking about these issues, and we start being more serious and better able to solve our problems.
Yeah. Well, actually, Adam Smith says in his book that the majority of the things, and the butcher gives you the meat, not because he loves you, but he has an interest, which one is not bad. Yeah. Indeed. Why not? Yeah. Win-win. It's might be a good deal.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's right. And Adam, he wasn't just saying, like, people often think he's saying, well, people are all really selfish and I totally don't care about others. But he meant more like, no, a really good thing about markets is I have to sort of think through, like, what is it that you care about? How can I be of service to you?
Exactly.
So he thought people are predominantly fairly selfish, but not completely. We have some degree of altruistic concern. So some systems channel that desire to improve oneself into predatory behavior. You know, incidentally, real life socialism, you generally, on a big scale, you generally find it channeled into predation rather than into cooperation. Other systems channel it into cooperation. So, because I can't steal from you, I can't just take your things. If I want to trade with you, I have to find a way to be of service. And I compete with other people to be as much service as I can.
And I have to be better.
Yeah.
In order to win in competition.
Yeah. And this makes it so that people are able to cooperate on a scale of billions. And so the only economic system that we've devised that allows strangers to cooperate on a mass scale are capitalist systems. You need to have a market, you need to have money. Even for what it's worth, like Jerry Cohen, the person I'm responding to in this book, he's one of the greatest Marxist philosophers of the past 100 years. He, at the end of his book, says, yeah, we still need markets. We can't dispense with them. There's just socialism, pure socialism works on like a scale of about 120 people, maybe on a scale of 200. It doesn't work on the scale of tens of thousands or millions.
Yeah, but also even in hundreds, it's difficult. Thinking about the idea of Owen to try to establish in New Hampshire, I think was in the United States after New Lanark. He went there and tried to create this ideal society, and it doesn't work. And even the son complained, speaking about the father, how unjust was that system. Yeah. Because he gives the same who the one that do the work and to the one that doesn't.
Yes. And Cohen admits that, but he says, but that's just a problem with people. See, if we were good, that wouldn't happen. In real life, when we have a commune of that size, unless it's a very religious commune with complete shared identity, those sometimes work. But otherwise, what happens is I just try to take advantage of other people's work, and I know I can eat no matter how much I work, so I don't work very much, and then everyone starts resenting each other, and it collapses. There were something like 10,000 communal experiments in the United States between 1800 and 1900, and I think maybe 3 of them succeeded, other than like these so-called Hutterite communes. So, and that's because of this problem. But Cohen says, but that doesn't show that socialism is bad. It shows that you're bad. Because if we were good, we would just share, and we wouldn't take advantage of one another's generosity. So socialism doesn't work, but it doesn't work because people are bad. There's nothing wrong with socialism per se. If we were angels, that would all work fine.
That's true. I agree. I agree with them. Probably the problem of socialism is that from the beginning they have a very, very nice idea of trying to establish paradise on earth. But we are not angels, and paradise is not on earth. So it might be pieces of it and pieces of hell. So you have to manage between of them, isn't it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, in the real world, what you need to do is think about, given what people are like and what their dispositions are, which background rules will incentivize us to work together in a cooperative way. And that's what you need to do, figure that out. Cohen and many people who are critical of capitalism, though, they think, sure, what it does is it gets selfish people like you and me to work together, but it does it on the basis of self-interest, and so it must make us nastier over time. But interestingly, that's not what the research shows. So there are these games economists like to play. The tests, they're real-life games played between strangers. They're anonymous. I can't see you, so I don't have to worry about ever interacting with you again. So I have no external incentive other than the incentives created by the game. And we'll play for a large amount of money, say the equivalent of a month's salary, or maybe even more. And in these games, we can do things like I have the opportunity to cooperate with you or cheat you. I could lie to you. I could be trusting towards you or not. I could take advantage of your trusting behavior or not. I could be unconditionally generous or not. So these are games that are testing real-life behaviors. And a number of economists have played these games all around the world, testing what sorts of factors influence how people play. And contrary to what a lot of people might think, it turns out that the more capitalist a country is, the nicer people are in these games. They're more likely to give money to others, they're more likely to play fair, they're more likely to keep their word, they're less likely to take advantage, and so on. In fact, in the more socialist societies, they play nastier. And in traditional societies, tribal societies and so on, they're very distrusting and mean towards strangers. So contrary to what many people think about markets, they actually have this tendency to civilize us and make us kinder to one another.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things is that human being, and I just be part of a book of the Chilean Chamber of Commerce, and so I have to write down about history of commerce. And it's amazing to think about that commerce is probably one of the engine of everything. Mm-hmm. So civilization, even the scripture. So scripture wasn't invented to do poetry, nor to do philosophy, but to do business.
Yes.
So it's amazing. And if you realize that the human beings are doing business from the cage on, then you realize that it's something natural and it's not something just invented or imposed. If you have more of something and you need something of something else, then you exchange. Which one? It's amazing.
Yeah.
And money is amazing invention.
Yeah.
Because then it's not one thing to the other, but something that we assume that we establish that has a value and we can use that for exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Sometimes people talk as if like trade was invented in the year 1700 in England, and before that there was no such thing. People have always had a disposition to truck and barter, to use Smith's terminology. They've always traded. The question is just, have they lived in institutional structures where they're allowed to do this on a large scale or not?
Exactly.
Money is really the glue that holds the world together.
Yes.
It's the instrument of cooperation, and it's hard to overstate that. So if you've never taken a class in economics, you don't know in economics, this will sound mysterious, but you probably heard the idea, that money, the price of an object in the market is a function of supply and demand. What does it actually mean? What it means is there are billions of people out there. They all have their separate preferences and their separate bits of knowledge. When they react to the world and make choices, this spontaneously gives rise to market prices. The market price reflects all their disparate knowledge and all the things that they care about. And so the funny thing is, it thus contains information about what other people want in light of scarcity. And people are able to react to that, even though they don't understand that that's what a market price is, they nevertheless react to it. So to give an example, Coca-Cola switched from using tin to aluminum, not because they were trying to save the planet in their cans, but because one just got to be more expensive. If there's a problem where, a mine breaks down and something becomes more expensive, I'll just switch to the cheaper thing. But I'm reacting to scarcity. I'm reacting to other people's preferences. I'll have a tendency to conserve a material and leave it for higher valued uses. That's how markets work. What this means then is that a market price is actually information that tells you how to cooperate with others. It's giving you a signal saying, here's how you can be useful to all the other people out there in the world. And so one of the big findings in the 20th century in economics is that there is no substitute that we know of for cooperation on a mass scale for that kind of market price. On a personal scale, if we're talking about living in a family group of 6 people, I don't need to use market prices. I can just look at my children and I know what they need. I know enough about them, what their preferences are, what their problems are. I can just tell what they need. That's great. That only works up to about 120 people. You get beyond that, you no longer can use face-to-face interaction. You might think, well, what if we vote or something? That doesn't work either because it has the wrong kind of incentive structure. So really, market prices are essential for cooperation. They are the thing that makes it so that we can live in this world where, everything we buy, something like 100 million people went into making this glass. That's not an exaggeration. Like, how many people contribute to making this? About 100 million. Yeah. So how does it work? Prices.
I know. And if you're thinking about 20th century, because the second part of 19th century, socialism was the wave.
Yeah.
Everybody were socialists, one way or the other, socialist nationalist or socialist international, if you think about communism.
Yeah.
But everybody were socialist. Even the one that we now want to catalogate on the right, they were socialist too. So they believe that the government should establish the prices. And the first one that started with the idea of neoliberalism, were the group in Montpellier, and the people in Germany were the first of applying that idea of free prices. But everybody looked at them as they were crazy. And that was the German miracle. And then all follows later on, 70s. So in the 70s, until the 70s, they were all in an economic, very bad situation indeed, plus the oil prices and all the crisis, but mostly doing really badly and not understanding what inflation is, and it was a mess. So now we live in a world where when I explain to my students that the government fixes the prices, they look at you like, why? And I explain that because nobody knows that how people would know. Now we said how they do not understand that we will know. And this transition changed the world. So even though there are some neo-Keynesians on the way that wish to come back to that area, how to deal with that?
Yeah. Well, this is the perpetual problem that I think economists have, in that we might understand how this works, but the average person doesn't get it. It's somewhat difficult to explain it to them, and they're not designed to get it. So you can think of our mental architecture. We were designed for cooperation. We've evolved to be moral animals that work together, but not in a big society of tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people. We've evolved to live in family clans of about 120 members. Mm-hmm. And our intuitions about how sharing works, about how economies work, about distribution and so on, they're designed for being functional in that space. Because if you go back 200,000 years, like of Homo sapiens, that's how we lived up until maybe 5,000 years ago. So that's how we've designed. And now we're living in this new world where we're cooperating on the scale of millions or billions, and we still have that same mental architecture. It is not adapted to our current life. So many of our intuitions about how things should work are based upon these kind of metaphors about imagining government as being kind of like mommy distributing pie. And it isn't. It's not to say government's evil or good or whatever, but it's not mommy distributing pie. It's something very different. The incentive structures are very different. The president does not love you the way that your mom loves you. He doesn't know about you the way that your mom knows about you. So
yeah, I know.
We have to treat it differently.
Yeah, I always say to my students that nobody gives you because they love you except from your parents, of course, and your family could be an aunt, yes, but not the government. Yeah. Indeed. So that idea of the pie is something interesting, because I hear you in some videos, that idea, and speaking about equality and inequality. So that idea that is now on the table, which one worries that much people. So one of the things that happened in 18th century after the Enlightenment, when Rousseau established that idea of equality as the most important thing, and actually the well of being good, because if you don't have it, then you are bad, and then you need to do the social agreement to recover it. So the point is there from the origin a real equality? You came from philosophy. Equality exists in human being?
Yeah, my dissertation supervisor, David Schmitz, wrote a paper on this, and he started by saying, equality is kind of a mythology, and we treat people equally even though they're not equal. And for any given thing, some people are better than worse, and it doesn't all average out. It's not even true about when it comes to making contributions. Like Jeff Bezos of Amazon has contributed millions of times more to society than I will in my life. He's done much more for other people than I ever will, much more than the typical kindergarten teacher. I'm never going to catch up to him. So I think it's good to treat people equal in certain ways despite their descriptive inequality. And I'm certainly not saying that the inequality is about race or anything like that. I'm just saying any individuals are going to be different. So I think Rousseau got that right, saying, a good society is going to be one where everyone can look each other in the eye and shake hands or do whatever the custom is, and we're not going to have higher and lower status based on that. But does that have to go into, well then, therefore everyone should get exactly the same slice of pie? I'm not so sure. So this isn't original to John Rawls, but he's one of many philosophers who made this argument. imagine we come across a pie in the woods. And, when we find a pie in the woods, we think we should eat this pie, obviously. But it turns out as we go to cut it, it turns out to be a magic pie. It turns out when you cut this pie equally, it's about this size. When you cut it unequally, it becomes bigger. So it's possible to cut everyone an unequal slice, but a bigger slice. So then you have to ask, would you rather have an equally small slice or an unequal but bigger slice? So some people have even more. And so sometimes people say, like, well, the difference between, say, a capitalist economy and a socialist economy is that choice. Capitalist economies make everybody richer, but it's more unequal. Socialist economies make them poorer, but it's more equal. To be honest, though, it's not really clear that that's true. So there's a Canadian think tank called the Fraser Institute.
Yes.
Yeah, you know them. Yeah.
I know them.
But I don't know what the viewers know.
But yes, explain them.
Yeah, that's right. So every year they release an index examining the amount of economic freedom in different countries, and they do some interesting stuff. One is to look at income inequality between countries. It turns out the most capitalist countries, they have tremendous income inequality, but they're more equal than the lesser capitalist countries. So despite what they might think, if you take their data and you score all the countries in the world by more capitalist to less capitalist, there's actually a very slight negative correlation between being capitalist and being unequal. But maybe more importantly, so in the most capitalist countries like Chile or Sweden, actually Sweden is in the top 25%, or Switzerland or Canada or Australia or the United States, the bottom 10%, they have about 2.6% of the wealth, and that's not very much. But in the other countries, they have even less. But more interesting perhaps is how much total income they have, how much stuff do they actually get. So in the top 25% most capitalist countries, the per capita income for the bottom 10% of people, the amount of money they make, and this is before they get any government handouts, before any government welfare, they're actually just their straight income from the market, is about $11,000 in current US dollars. Sorry, I can't do the math that quickly for you to put it in Chilean pesos. That's on par with the average income in the entire world. So you go to the next group of countries and drops down to about that. So the so-called poor in the capitalist countries are making significantly more money than the middle class in the less capitalist countries. And for what it's worth, these numbers I'm giving you, these are all adjusting for the cost of living. I'm taking into account the fact that it's, say, more expensive to live in Washington, D.C. than to live in, rural Peru. So these are real numbers. So then you have to ask, if you care about people having stuff, isn't it better to maybe have more, even if it's unequal, than have less and have it be equal?
Yeah, it sounds like remember where in the discourse on the House of Parliament when Margaret Thatcher speak about the bread and says you wish to have in order that not to be the richer be no richer, you rather prefer that the poor are poor, and start with that idea, which make the people laugh because that was really funny the way she explained it, but it is the same.
Yeah, but you say that to people, and I think it's obviously better to be rich but unequal than equally poor. But there are people that go, no, equally poor is great. Who cares about money? All I care about is status and how I compare to other people. And then I start to wonder, if you really think that way, how much of it is about sort of envy and this resentment of what's different. But I think a good spokesperson actually for the idea that it should be, that money really does matter, is actually that Marxist philosopher Jerry Cohen I mentioned before. So even though he's a Marxist, but Marxism, we often forget this today, but Marxism was originally about making the poor rich. That was the point.
Yes.
Yeah. Marxists didn't start being anti-money until it looked like it wasn't working in the Soviet Union. Originally was, we're going to make all the poor people really rich. That's the point. Liberate them from poverty and make them wealthy. And so he says, Jerry Cohen says, what money is a ticket to the world. Not money, but the real wealth it represents. The more of this you have, the more things you're able to do. So if you're, my children, because they grew up richer than I did, they've been around, they've seen much more of the world than I ever had at their age. They've tasted foods from all over. They've experienced culture from all over. They've done sports and activities and things I would never get to do. The more money you have, the more you can just be authentically who you are. You have your preferences and you can explore them. So someone like me, if I'd been born in the United States just 100 years prior, I'd be working in Lowell, Massachusetts, making clothing. It's a perfectly noble profession. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not who I was meant to be. It's not me living my best life. But because I lived 100 years later, just lucky, I was born later, I get to work in an atmosphere where I can explore ideas for a living and talk to interesting people for a living and travel the world. And that's because I'm in a richer country. That money is a ticket to see everything.
It is. It is true. Yeah, the majority of the things related with the equality is something with wealth. That's the equality they wanted. It's not the dignity, because, and not either is equality on law. Yeah, because this is an equality that you might say that it exists.
Yeah.
And if you go into philosophy deeper and go to Christian philosopher, then you realize freedom, and freedom is something that makes you unequal immediately.
Yeah.
Because there are tons of possibilities.
Yeah.
In your life. So I practiced with my students once socialism, and they laughed at the end. At the end, they cry in between, because they decided that they were socialist. I said, okay, you are a socialist, great. So after the first test, I gave them the same mark to all. I make an average. They were furious.
Yeah.
This is the most unjust things that ever somebody do. And I said, this is true. It's completely unjust.
Yeah.
Because you study and you deserve to have a better mark, but you have a middle one.
Why didn't they respond and say, if they really are socialists, why not say, but yeah, I scored better than he did, but that's just luck. I was born smart. I had parents who were better about educating me. I just had more conscientiousness, but I didn't do anything to deserve to be conscientious. It's just how I was designed or something.
Exactly.
So I didn't deserve it, so sure, average all of my grades together. But yeah, I think it appeals to people. I kind of a similar story. I never tried running an experiment on people, but I know it's a great story. But I remember talking to them about, I was working at Brown University, an elite Ivy League school in Rhode Island in the States. And the students there tend to be pretty high income. So I was teaching them this paper by Peter Singer, where he argues that you should, if you're a typical person living in a rich country, you should give away most of your excess money to help the poor. So like the people watching this, like they should be giving away like 50% of their income. And I remember a kid raised his hand and said, yeah, soak the rich, take their money. And I said, hold on, he's not talking about Bill Gates, he's talking about you. So I pulled out the newspaper and I said, it had a profile of the incoming class, and the median household income for the incoming class that year of undergraduates was over $250,000, which means that most of the students there, they weren't just in the top 1% of income earners by world standards, they were in the top 2% or 1% of income earners by the United States standards. So they're fabulously rich. But when they think about equalizing things, they don't think about taking their stuff away. They think about the people who are one level up and taking it down.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. It's easy to do things with the money of others.
Yes.
It's not easy with the own one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go now in your last book into democracy, and try to figure out how to change, because, well, we live in the Western civilization, which one invented models and changing all the time. People that not teach or not are familiar with history, they do not realize how many things in economics and in politics we invented. If we compare ourselves with China or with Russia, they're statics. They're all the time the same. They don't change. We are a dynamic culture, so we change all the time. And democracy still for a long time, and it's the best we had by now. I always say by now, and they look at me like, how you said that?
Yeah.
Because it's that sort of God. So that we live in a society that leaves God away as an idea, but create new gods.
Yes.
Yeah. So the new gods are democracy, so it's like a sphere, untouchable, and human rights, which one also has another sphere, untouchable, and even you cannot even discuss about the topic. But now you explain, I think, a great idea. Can you explain why so, and why somebody are so brave to say democracy is not perfect?
Yeah. It seems like it's such an obvious thing to say, but you're right. When people say democracy,
of course, it's some religious stuff.
They hear angels sing and so on. And it's weird because honestly, like if we were, going back to the utopian theorizing, if we were perfectly good, we wouldn't have democracy, we wouldn't have government at all. right? It's like asking like what kind of criminal justice system you would have if we were angels. We wouldn't have it. So it's already a compromise based upon our flaws. So how can it be religiously valuable? But yeah, so I think democracy is the best system that we have so far. But my view of democracy is that it's like a watch. It's a tool. And I would be perfectly happy to substitute this watch for a better watch if I could find one and at the right price. That's what I think about democracy too. It's a hammer, it's useful, but if you can find a better tool, you should feel free to use it. It has no value in and of itself. So that's part of what the book Against Democracy is trying to argue. But I think we know that there are flaws in democracy. And the flaw comes down to the thing you talked about with your students. If you announce to your students ahead of time, you're going to have a final exam in 15 weeks. Rather than you getting your own grade, I'm just going to average all of your grades together. You'll all get the same grade. You'd expect them to fail the class.
Yes.
Not because they're stupid, not because they're mean, but because the incentives you've incentivized them to remain ignorant, to not learn the material. Because they know that if they put in a lot of effort, they'll fail. And if they don't put any effort, they'll fail. No matter what they fail, why put in effort?
Of course.
Democracy is like that, but with millions of people taking a final exam every 4 years. So when I vote, if I decide to drink this glass of water, it went into my face, it worked. If I decide Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States, I didn't check, but I'm pretty sure it didn't work. It has no effect, it doesn't do anything. If I vote for my interests, against my interests, just at random and stay home, it has the same effect. I have something like, depending on which model you use, like about a 1 in a billion or less chance of being decisive in any major election. Your vote counts for more because you have a different voting system here in Chile, but it still doesn't count for very much.
Still, same.
Yeah, it's still very low chance of being decisive. So because of that, people are what we call rationally ignorant. They don't know very much about politics, and it's not because they're dumb, it's because investing in that knowledge does not pay off. People tend to consume information and retain it only if it's interesting or useful.
So these are the hooligans.
Yeah. So some people consume a lot of political information because they're fans, but they do it in a very biased way. They just want to like confirm whatever they believe and hate on people they disagree with. So we either have these kind of ignorant people I call hobbits and better informed, though not well informed, but very biased people I call hooligans. Democracy creates that because it has a built-in problem. It's not easy to fix that. But one idea I have is epistocracy. So epistocracy refers to a system in which in one way or another you weigh votes according to knowledge in order to overcome some of the problems. There's lots of variations of epistocracy, some of which aren't going to work and are going to be disasters. Those are the ones that the critics fix on. They're not the ones I advocate, but that's what they pick on because democracy is a sacred value.
Yes.
You can't challenge it. But the thing that actually I think would be worth doing is what I call enlightened preference voting, or sometimes they call it government by simulated oracle, but let's call it enlightened preference voting. Here's what happens. Election day takes place, everyone gets to vote, as an equal really. Let children vote, let everybody vote. No reason to kick anybody out.
Doesn't matter, everybody
Everyone,
votes.
Yeah. When they vote though, they do 3 things. The first thing is they tell us what it is they want. They tell us their preference on whatever it is the election is about. The second thing they do is they give us their information about who they are. Things like your income, your gender identity, your race, all these other kinds of factors.
Sort of little census.
Yeah, a little bit of a census, because these things affect how people vote. The third thing we do is we give them a quiz of very basic political information. Do you know which parties are in a coalition controlling Congress? Do you know who the president is? Do you know some factors like the unemployment rate or how much money is being spent by the federal government on various kinds of things? You just ask them these basic questions, not high-level theory, not economics, but just basic political information. When you get these 3 sets of data, what people want, who they are, and what they know, you take that data, you make it anonymous, you release it to the public. Then anyone with like a PhD in political science, anyone who's taking statistics in graduate school could then calculate what would the public have wanted if it were fully informed. A demographically identical public looks exactly like our public, but I magically wave a wand and make them fully informed on this test. What would they want? And so the idea here is that would be strong evidence that we should do this thing instead of what we're actually doing.
So then you can even know about an election.
Yeah.
So for instance, I don't know, and some election, for instance, here in Chile, sometimes now we have it's not mandatory to vote. So in not the current election, but before, Michelle Bachelet won with a lot of percentage, not amount of votes, but also she has a quite socialist program, but she feels that people wanted that because she represents that, and then things move on, and people doesn't really want that. But if we apply that, we can really know what people really wanted.
Well, in a sense, we're not only asking what the individuals want, because...
No, I know, but at least you can know if they are fully informed, so if they really like the program or not. Yeah. Because if they are informed, they probably vote for the program, for the ideas. If they are not informed, they can vote for whatever because they hate the other. Just that's the reason. Which one is not a reason?
That's right.
And so on and so forth.
And it's important to say here too, just because I think you get it, but like people often misunderstand. I'm not saying take people, divide them up into the informed and the uninformed.
No.
Force the
everybody
uninformed
votes.
Everybody
but at
votes.
least you can
but we now
work
know
with that information.
If a populace exactly the same as Chile in terms of income and race and all these other things suddenly knew everything that's on that quiz, what would they have supported? And then we know, and we can do that instead. And a good example of like when this might have worked would be take the recent Brexit vote. Right?
No. That's a better example.
But it works really well because we know when that vote was taking place, a slight majority of people favored leaving. It wasn't clear they understood what they were doing, and it's actually very clear they didn't understand. But a polling firm named Ipsos Mori polled people both before and after the vote to figure out what they knew. And they asked them some questions, such as, how much money comes into the United Kingdom from the European Union in terms of like absolute levels or percentage? How much money is the UK sending out? What percent of the UK is made up of immigrants from the EU? Most people who voted got those questions wrong by a lot. But what they found was that the people who voted leave, they were often exaggerating by like a factor of 100. So when it came to say estimating how many immigrants were in the country from the European Union, the actual answer is about 5%. They thought it was about 25%. The people who voted remain, they were wrong too, but they were closer to the truth. And so what you find is that for all these different questions they asked, the closer the voter was to the truth, the more likely they were to vote remain rather than leave. And then because they asked them about their demographics, they could say, and by the way, this is really just because of the knowledge. It wasn't because of their race. It wasn't because of their income, because we can statistically control for that and figure out if that has an effect. And it's really the information that's doing it. Another example that's kind of funny in the U.S. is, we've had some belligerent relationships with North Korea. And a few years ago, there was talk, not very serious talk, about possibly attacking them.
I was pretty much that week to go to Hawaii, and we were wondering. And I said, let's go. We can die in paradise.
If you're going to die, that's the place to die, right? But one thing they did with Americans was they gave them a map, and Americans are better at geography than we get credit for. But they asked them, okay, do you think we should attack North Korea, yes or no? Some people say yes, most people say no. Cool, now that you've told me your answer, here's a map of the world. Where is North Korea? Take a pin and stick it in it. And so people did pretty well. They were, mostly getting it around where Korea is. But the funny thing was, the farther away, the more wrong they were. If they were putting the pin like way over here in like Canada, or Chile or something, then those were the people that were like, yeah, bomb it. And the people who knew where Korea was,
they said no, don't bomb.
Yeah, and that starts to be evidence that the reason you think that is because you don't know what you're talking about, right? So maybe you shouldn't vote on that way. Maybe there's something really weird about what if we actually did attack them and we had it, like imagine we had like a plebiscite, imagine we had a referendum and we voted, we're going to attack North Korea, and the attack side won, and they won because they're just ignorant. That'd be really disastrous. And it'd be weird to say, but it's democracy, so it's okay.
Yeah,
so most people
actually democracy finally makes Hitler
Absolutely.
Chancellor.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. People forget that, but Hitler came to power legally. I mean, once he came into power, he did things that were illegal, but he came to power legally because he was voted in the fourth federal election in 1932. The Nationalists and the Nazis won a coalition government through legitimate democratic governance.
Exactly.
Yeah, and now think of the incentives. I mentioned this in the book. Imagine you were a Jewish person in Germany at that time. If Hitler wins, that's a disaster for you.
Yes.
But voting for him is not a disaster.
No.
That's the problem. This is why people can be ignorant. Hitler winning, horrible. You voting for him has the same effect as you voting against him, has the same effect as you staying home.
Yes.
Right? Or another analogy, winning the lottery is worth lots of money, but a lottery ticket is worth nothing.
Yes.
Right? So that's how voting is. Voting is like a lottery ticket, and the chances of you scratching the winner and being the person who breaks the tie are vanishingly small. And so because of that, people, they don't like to say it, but they know that. We know from surveys they understand that. Because of that, people don't have a very strong incentive to know much about what they're doing, or when they form coalitions and join a party, to think carefully about it. And so in fact, the strongest evidence we have is that the reason people support parties is not because they have a set of values, they form an ideology, and they find the party that matches their beliefs, and they pick it and they vote for it. That's not usually what goes on. It's more like this. I am an Irish person from the Boston area. Through random historical circumstance, people of Irish descent in the Boston area tend to vote for Democrats. Not because the Democrats are good for them, but because of
tradition.
Weird history. Like just random stuff happens that attaches people to that. And so therefore I'll vote Democrat.
It doesn't matter who.
Yeah, and it turns out most people who vote for parties, they don't actually share the same values as that party. They often don't know what the party supports. They often think that they do. They're like, the party believes this, and they're wrong, they're mistaken. And even among the people who do share it, you might think, well, they first had a set of values and ideas, and they find the party that they agree with. That's not what happens. It's rather, they get attached to a party, and they convince themselves afterward that they agree with it. So a nice example of this, at least in the United States, would be Republicans were pro-free trade. Donald Trump, who's a protectionist, rose up and became the new presumptive nominee. When he became the presumptive nominee, Republicans switched to being anti-free trade, almost overnight. And then political scientists surveyed them and asked them, why did you change? And their reaction was, I didn't change my mind, I've always been protectionist. So they did change their mind, and they didn't even know.
Yeah. Exactly. So thank you for the conversations, for that idea. I will be an eye on what you will doing and how people react about it, because I think it's a good idea. I don't know if it's practicable, easy to do it, because there will be many forces against it.
Yeah.
But I think at least put something on the table. We can discuss about the system. So thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Nos vemos la próxima semana. Que estén muy bien.